Hello, good morning. Can you see my screen, please?
Yes, ma.
Yes.
Okay. All right. For those, welcome to day four. Today is day four of the Textilers Cohort 4.0. And if you are joining us for the first time in this class, you're welcome. For those of you who have been consistent from day one, it is so much encouraging to see you still show up every day. It just keeps giving us that energy to bring more to you. If you're watching us from our YouTube channel, okay, this is brought to you by Textilers. Is a community. You will see a lot of about us on our LinkedIn profile. Go and check us up on LinkedIn and Twitter. But this is our cohort 4.0, and this is the security learning pathway. We decided for this cohort 4 that we'll be looking at Microsoft Identity and Access Administrator. My name is Joy Emedom. I'm a Textilers mentor. I'm a senior security consultant at Avanade, based in Ireland, and I have over 7 years experience doing identity and access management, both from an administrator perspective and in security. So today is our day four. Please try and watch our previous day 1 to 3 so that you can understand, the beginning, the importance, the value that identity and access management brings into the whole cloud security posture. So today, from our outline that we shared, this is day four. Let me just expand this. Yeah, so this is day one. This is what we'll be doing today on day four. So we'll be looking at, the Azure multi-factor authentication. So remember that we talked about that, identity, you need to, authenticate, then authorize, and then now, grant somebody access to be able to see what they need to do. And then we looked at 3 important zero trust methodologies that we apply in identity and access management. Least privilege, who can remind me another one? Um, Always assume breach. And then there's one more.
Verify explicitly, right?
Oh, trust me, I struggle with that word. Explicitly, yes, verify explicitly. So what does that mean? It means that, oh, this username has this person, Joy.emedom, has put in her username. Okay, then she puts in her password. Okay, but I don't just want to rely on username and password. What if her password has been compromised? Then what do I want to do? In order to verify explicitly, I put in a multi-factor authentication, just so that there's a second authentication that helps me validate who this user is. And I can, I would have verified explicitly that this is the user that's supposed to have access to these resources. So in that process, we'll be looking at the Azure multi-factor authentication. Identity and access management runs on the same, on the same foundation, which is, authorization, authentication. But today, or rather in this community or cohort, we're looking at the Microsoft identity management, which we said is the Microsoft Azure Active Directory. And that's why we will be looking at everything around the Microsoft Azure Active Directory. And the good thing is that the Microsoft Azure Active Directory as an identity provider is not limited. So it allows you to integration to do B2B, which is business to business integration, business to customers. So you can integrate with other third-party platforms and, still apply those in identity protections, that you need. So the multi-factor authentication, we'll be looking at it today, and how it helps us to verify explicitly. Okay.
Sorry, excuse me. Before you go
Yeah.
on, the
Yeah.
assignment. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay. The assignment you gave us to do.
Yeah.
Um, I I was stuck somewhere. Okay, during the is it during the lab we could go through it? Yeah,
Yes.
is that
I've
okay?
told you guys, you don't have to wait till Saturday. During the week, buzz me. I'm very busy, yes, but you might just be
Yeah.
lucky to hit me on some free spots, right? So that you don't limit yourself, all the way till Saturday. Okay, because you can see now the 3 of you have issues. So you can imagine by the time we attend to 3 of you, it might just extend. So during the as you encounter that issue, you're gingered, you're in the mood to troubleshoot, you're in the mood to work, and then you have that issue. Guess what? What makes you an authority in this industry is your ability to troubleshoot. Anybody can take a guide and implement step by step. What stands one engineer from the other is when they experience issues and the ability to think it through. That's why for me, it's not about just showing you guys the guide. That's why you have to do it yourself, so that when we encounter the problem, when you call me and we're troubleshooting, it's my ability. When we start, you see how I help people solve problem. I don't solve the problem. I force you to think about why would this be happening, what could be the reason, and as you are thinking about it, you find out where your solution is, and that's what helps you to become an authority in this space. So please take advantage of that. I've made myself available. The moment you're doing it, you get the hiccup. Don't say, I'm going to wait. Take up your phone, call me. I might just be free at that slot. We jump on the call, we troubleshoot and resolve it so that you can continue. Please.
I already disturbed you this week, so I didn't want to
That's fine.
disturb you again.
No, it doesn't,
Yeah.
honestly, it doesn't matter. The worst that will
Okay.
happen is that I will tell you that I am not available because I
Yeah.
have another clash. I won't lie to you, I'm very busy, but at the same time, I'd rather that you take advantage of it asking me than assume that I'm not available.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. So some key Azure AD features that help us to, protect cloud assets are things like, password complexity rules, password expiration rules, self-service password, the Azure AD identity protection, the Azure AD password protection, your Azure AD Smart Lock, your Azure AD Proxy. These are different things. Azure AD Connect, which we looked at last week. The Azure AD Connect, if you recall last week, I said back in the days before cloud, organizations built their Microsoft Active Directory in their own data center. So when cloud came, they couldn't just junk off people's identity. Microsoft now allowed them to be able to transition and integrate those on-prem identity to the cloud, and then take their time to mature, and then they can later decommission. So for that to happen, federation needed to happen. Federation is the coming together of one entity with another entity in layman terms. And so the Azure AD Connect, anytime you see the acronym AD, it always refers to Active Directory. Okay, so the Azure AD Connect is a component that you install, and then that allows you to connect your on-prem Active Directory and the Microsoft Azure Active Directory. So this also helps us to protect cloud assets. And then we have the Azure MFA and conditional access. And like I said a few minutes ago, always think zero trust. Always think zero trust. And under identity and asset management, the three key zero trust functions or foundations that we use are: we always verify, we use least privilege access, and we always assume that there's a breach by the actions or triggers that we see. So what is Azure multi-factor authentication? It's that second authentication that you use to verify. The user has put in their username and password, but you're saying, I don't want to rely on only this means of authentication. How am I sure that this user, is the actual user that is supposed to, come into this environment? What if the password has been compromised? So I put in a second factor authentication, and one of the values is that it helps you to secure, just more than passwords, and then it's easy and quick to set up and manage. It provides a stronger identity verification, stronger security, and there are different types of authentication methods that come with its own different types of level of security. Now, as you advance in security, know that there's nothing that cannot be compromised. Multi-factor authentications can be compromised. However, they provide that extra layer of security, and so with proper user education and proper user awareness, you would have improved on your security maturity of your organization, when you introduce another layer of complexity to just the way users, will authenticate, just to, improve on the security level. So in authentication, we work with three key things.
Sorry.
We say, yes, ma'am.
Sorry. Please, could you do a full screen? You're not doing full presentation.
Okay.
Yeah,
Just
thank
hold
you.
on. Yeah.
No, okay, actually, it's just your slides. It wasn't full presentation, just the slides.
Yeah, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
coming. I know.
Okay.
Let me switch back to the method. I just used a different method today. So let me use what I normally use used to be okay, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so let me stick to that method. Let me know once you can see the screen, please.
Okay.
Is it better now? Is it better?
Yeah, it's okay now. Thank you.
Yeah. So in authentication, we have we have three key factors that we use in building an authentication framework. We say something you know, something you possess, and something that you are. Okay, so something you know is your password, right? So you know your password, and then something that you possess can be any form of biometrics. So it could either be your phone, it could be your fingerprint, it could be a smart key reader, it could be a smart card reader, it could be a USB key. And then that brings you to something that you are, which is, it arrives as, okay, this is now who you are. So for us to be able to say that we have verified explicitly, we need something that you know plus something that you possess. And that confirms to us that, oh, this is Titi, oh, this is Miriam, oh, this is Franca. Then that becomes who you are. So that's what leads us into this multi-factor authentication. So something can be your password, an answer to a security question. Something you possess might be your mobile app that has a authenticator. So you will be downloading the Microsoft Authenticator in your labs, or you'll be using your Google Authenticator. You don't necessarily, Microsoft does not force you to use the Microsoft Authenticator. It's just that, if you're in an organization that works with standardization, you then will be required that you use the Microsoft. But if you're an organization that probably allows people to choose what type of authenticator that they want, then people can also still use the Google Authenticator and link it with their Microsoft identity, right? Or use a token generating device. So I'm sure most of you, for your internet banking, right, there are certain transactions that you want to do. The bank will give you those hardware token. Okay, so that's something that you possess. So how is the bank going to trust that this person that put in this username and password and wants to move this large sum of money is the real person? So they either ask you a security question, and when they finish asking you, when you pass that your security question, the next thing they tell you is that you should put the token number generated on your device, because that's something that you possess. Because at that point, they're like, because you are the owner of the account and you are sure of the password and you now put what you possess, then they can now confirm that this is, who you are. Now we want to enabling MFA with conditional access. So once we have authenticated the user with a username and password, once the user has been verified that, oh, this is the user, the next thing we want to do is introduce what we call the conditional access policies, right? The conditional access policy is what helps us, to make sure that the user or a group has MFA applied. Because, for instance, think about it this way. You create a user, you're in the IT department, HR, sends the notification that you should create a user, or the HR creates a user on their HR platform. And when they create the user on their HR platform, it goes into your identity system and then a user is created. How then do you enforce that a user does not log into your environment without an MFA? How do you make sure that when a user is logging in, the system will enforce that anybody that is logging into our organization, it must prompt you for an MFA? So that peradventure, somebody has gone for vacation somewhere, forgot their device, and their device, was compromised, and then the password was taken. When the person, comes back and is using another device, or the hacker has tried to use that device to log in, it will prompt for, authentication. How do you enforce that? Anytime somebody needs to authenticate, we want to make sure that you're not just doing something that you know, you're doing something that you have. So we now use the conditional access policy, right? And the conditional access policy helps us to say that, this user or XYZ people in this group, or this application, or this device, whatever it is that is requiring authentication, must have MFA before they can access that resources. So like this diagram explains, look at you, you're a user, you are here, right? And you're in location A, and then you put in your password. And the moment you come, the conditional access, it what helps you to say, oh, MFA is required. And if you don't have MFA, to block it. If you have MFA, to allow you access into the organization. The same thing with a device, the same thing with an application, So this is how we enforce, verify explicitly, by infusing MFA and conditional access policies. So as you begin to create different user stories and use cases for identity and access management, conditional access is what helps you enforce that, identity protection that you want to put on that user account or on that users. So there are different user states of MFA. We have three. We have disabled. So if a user state on MFA is saying that the MFA is disabled, what this means is that a user has not been enrolled in MFA. And that's the default state. So Microsoft does not enforce MFA by default. It just makes sure that, people think about it. It gives you a period, to decide if that's what you want, so that people can either build the culture if they don't have the culture in their environment. Probably your organization has already started using, some form of identity, and by the time you integrated Microsoft, it doesn't just throw your users off. So it allows you to build that culture. So the default state is always disabled, which means that no user has been enrolled. When you have an enabled state, it means that the user is enrolled in MFA, but they can still use their password, right? So you can enable MFA, but then you are still saying, I'm not going to enforce it. No problem, use your password. So for some of you that set up the lab, I'm sure you saw where the thing will ask you to put your MFA and still give you the option to say, ask later, right? So that account that you are using was enabled for MFA, but it wasn't enforced. So you still had the option to still go ahead and use your password, to log in, but it will still be reminding you that, oh, you need to register for MFA, but it's not enforcing you. Now, the moment you enforce MFA for a user, it means that that user has been enrolled for MFA, and the user either has completed the MFA registration, or if the user has not completed, when the user is logging in, the user will now be forced to complete it. So these different states of MFA, states are very important to understand as you either introduce this form of identity protection in an organization, or if you are doing the solutioning from day one and you're recommending something to an organization, you're telling an organization, how do you protect your identity today? How do you ensure that if a user's account is compromised, you guys can restrict access to what they do? And then you can let them know that we don't have to just enforce everybody. We can create people into different groups, or we can roll it department by department. The first set of people are already in disabled state. We can put the next set of people in enabled and allow the people in enabled to run for 2 weeks. And then by the third week, we switch them to enforce, which now forces them. So it also helps in adoption when you want to roll out this security function. What are different considerations for you to consider for Azure AD MFA based on your infrastructure? So when you want to do MFA in a cloud-only setup, that's your organization does not have any on-prem. All your users are all on the cloud. And the cloud in this instance is the Microsoft Azure Active Directory, because that's what is our identity provider that we're using. You don't need any other thing. Of course, based on that, you have the right license. Like I keep telling you, licensing is another whole conversation of the day, especially when you want to, look at budget. But first of all, can the solution do it? The answer is yes. So it's not when your organization is now telling you to submit a proposal or do budgeting cost, then you now have to go and find what's the licensing cost. But from a solution perspective, we're speaking that, all things being equal, you have the right license. If your users are all in the cloud, so if you have a client, that a prospective client that you see that is strictly on the cloud, but you want to help do an identity access management assessment, the first thing you want to find is, how are they verifying explicitly? How are they making sure that they verify explicitly? And so you go to the identity protection to see what are the methods that they've put in place. You discover that they don't even have MFA, right? So as long as they're a cloud user, they don't need any other additional infrastructure to be set up. Because they are cloud, all they need is the right configuration, and this will work. In the instance where it's hybrid, anytime you hear us use the terminology hybrid, what does it mean? It means that that client has an identity provider in their on-prem environment. It's good to get familiar with these terminologies. So an on-prem environment is, I give an example again. Back in the days, a company will set up their IT office or their head office, and they'll create a room and call it the data center and say that that's IT's data center. And IT will buy servers and put into that place and now create a network and put in an identity provider. In the Microsoft space, it was called the Microsoft Active Directory. Now, as cloud began to come in and people began to host applications on the cloud, companies began to migrate. In order to synchronize that on-prem identity in the cloud, it's what we call hybrid identity. They will put the Azure AD. And once that on-prem can talk to the Microsoft Azure AD, that integration is now called hybrid identity, right? So if you have hybrid identity, deployed, then if you have on-prem users, right, and you want to leverage on these MFA functionalities, I've rephrased, if you have on-prem identities that are in your on-prem infrastructure, but you want to leverage on these MFA and conditional access policies that we are going to be speaking, we have started speaking about, you will need to create a hybrid identity by introducing your Azure AD, so that those credentials can be synchronized, right, and federated to the Azure Active Directory, and then those policies can be applied. But there are instances where, you want to also enforce this policy on legacy applications. So you have done the hybrid, that's for the identity. Remember, when we talked in day one about identity, it wasn't only on user names. We talked about devices as identities. Remember, we talked about applications as identities. So an organization could have an organization can introduce Azure AD, right? Azure AD Connect, and synchronize their accounts to the cloud. However, they still have some applications that are in their data center that are not yet available on the internet, right? So maybe I take for instance, Titi is doing CCTV camera. So let us take it that she set up the server in the client's data center, right? And as she set up that server in the client's data center, the management interface of that CCTV camera, I can't remember what it's called, is viewed only when you are in the company environment, right? Now, MD, CEO, CSO, they want to be able to view that dashboard of the different cameras, even when they are not in the country, even when they are not around. Now, some of these CCTV camera technology providers now are now having cloud versions. So what they're saying to their clients is upgrade to the cloud version. But let us take it that a client is not yet ready. Maybe the investment cost of upgrading that whole CCTV platform to the cloud and then changing their whole network infrastructure so that those cameras that are on-prem, their IPs will be able to feed into the management console, and then the management console is hosted on the cloud, right? What can they do? If they already have a Microsoft Azure platform, they can leverage on what we call the Microsoft Azure AD proxy that allows us to publish on-prem legacy applications. They're already on-prem. You're not going to change anything. You just put in a proxy component on the gateway on either your DMZ gateway, and then that will now allow you to be able to connect to your on-prem applications and still enforce conditional access policies, enforce MFA, but people can still see those on-prem applications like as if they were hosted on the internet, but those applications are not available on the internet. So those are some of the things after the cohort training in our in our regular meetings we'll be talking about. You'll be seeing how it's possible. So like I told you, Titi, you don't have to junk your years of, rather all those your clients, and you need to start thinking about how to help them to improve. Now you are going back to them with value propositions. You're going back to them to begin to think out of the box. You set up CCTV for them, it's working, they're impressed with that your service. You've done a wonderful service, but now business is evolving. They want to be able to sit at home and view cameras. They want to be able to sit at home and see, what is happening in the office. They want to be able to sit at home and view cameras, images and footages. You can leverage on this identity and access management framework and, create a solution for them that still allows them to not change the architecture that they have on-prem, but only extend that service to the cloud while still providing identity security. Now, you can also use your Azure AD MFA with a radius authentication. This is in instances where you probably have a network access control server, okay? So for instance, there are organizations that will say, back in the days, as technology came, when organizations were excited and creating network technology, what you would see typically would be somebody can walk into an office, take a network cable, plug into his laptop, and automatically will have network access. And so what that meant is that the hacker could sit down in that organization and begin to span. That's why when you go to the airports, the cafe shops, and the malls, wherever they give you free internet Wi-Fi connections, you are told to be very careful what you use it to do, right? You're told to be very careful what you use it to do, because if a hacker is on the same network as you are, all they need to do is put up a scanning device and begin to scan that network, because that wireless network is most times not a secured network. So for organizations to ensure that when they provide Wi-Fi or their network access control is only accessed by their own staff. So how do they verify explicitly? They put in network policy servers. Some terminologies we call it network access controls. Okay, that first of all, we'll probably do machine authentication, machine certificate-based authentication before allowing you in. And so you can integrate the Azure Active Directory MFA with this form of radius authentication. Trust me, this is as you begin to advance in, in integration, but you will typically see this being possible for you to be able to integrate NAC solutions. And one of them is like the Cisco policy, Cisco identity service engine with Azure MFA. So you want to plan your multi-factor authentication deployment, right? Like I said, the reason why those 3 states are being made is so that you can, be able to plan your deployment very well. So you want to first of all get your employee buy-ins. Like I said, you don't just want to, people just come to work and then they are seeing prompts. What do? So either do your normal user communication through maybe posters, emails, supporting, roll out your MFA in phases. Don't just hit to everybody in the organization. That's why if you look at the beginning with day 1, day 2, day 3, we've talked about how to, create groups, create different identities in groups so that you can use those kind of setups to roll out, create a full communication plan. Okay, on day 1, what are you going to tell people to do? On week 2, what are you going to tell people to do, right? And then tie your MFA rollout with conditional access compliance. So it could be that once you are with a device that we have noticed does not have an updated antivirus, right? You fall into the category of we must enforce. Or once you are a device and we are seeing that your location is within XYZ. So today, some of us, even though we're Nigerians working in other countries, we can't work, as much as remote work is allowed. So while we're in the country where we're working, we don't necessarily have to come to the office. But for instance, if I had an emergency and I had to come home back in Nigeria, I won't be able to work remotely. even though my organization runs a remote work policy. Why? Because my location, Nigeria, is under what we call the red zone for one or two reasons that we know. So at that moment, the moment I carry my work laptop there and I power it on, because my IP will be showing Nigeria region, I will automatically be denied access, to company, portals, right? So that's one of the things conditional access policy can do for you. Conditional access policy can enforce location-based checks so that you verify locations before you grant access. The same thing with applications. You can go as much as saying that most people, when they get their mobile phones, they go and jailbreak their mobile phones so that they can put in all sorts of applications that help them, take harvest credentials. Sometimes too unknowingly, some people don't know. Some people download applications from the internet. I recently saw an ad for one application. It looked very interesting, but off my head, I was curious as to if this was real. That means the whole world will be using it. So it means that they know that there's every one or two possibility that people will not trust them. But that one or two people that drop, what is the thing that they can do? How many of you, this whole loan shark thing that happens in Nigeria, where people take loan and then you just find yourself receiving a call, somebody telling you that, oh, so person took loan and made you a collateral, and you're upset because you're like, why would the person make me a guarantor without telling me? Meanwhile, the person didn't make a guarantor. What happens is that those loan apps, the terms and conditions they put there, people don't read, allowed them to be able to harvest contact address. So while they were downloading the mobile app would access the contact, folder and export all the contact folder. But because that person is desperate for that loan, they just click next, next, next. They didn't know that they accepted that terms and condition. So, and most times when you save people on your phone, you save them to relate what they are with you, right? So for all of you that have your number, what I have said is with Textiler. So if somebody harvested my contact list, they automatically know that XYZ people are members of Textiler community. So imagine that they wanted to target Textilers community members, with a targeted kind of attack. It will be easy because they can be able to know that all these people are members of Textilers, right? So it's very important that we understand the kind of applications we do. So in some instance, if an organization is saying it's okay for you to use your personal devices to access our resources, what they will do is they'll put conditional access policies that allow them to be able to say, if XYZ kind of applications are found on this person's, device, then, you should enforce MFA or the person will not be able to do stuff. And then we have different type of authentication methods. So you want to also decide during your deployment plan, what kind of authentication method do I want to do? And you want to also plan, how do I want the MFA registration process to be? And then what happens to this system after MFA has been established? It's very good that you sit down and do plan. I always tell people that planning and design is more work than implementation. Implementation is implementation, but you can only implement when you have a proper design and method of procedure and plan in place. So we have different supported authentication methods, right, for MFA. So when you want to do MFA, right, you can choose the authentication method that you want to make available, right? It's always recommended that you don't do only one method. It's always good to have at least two methods, just because of what? High availability. And again, because it's the cloud, you're not running the infrastructure. Just what of if, as much as we know that Microsoft has given us 99.9% on their cloud infrastructure, but what if, the call to phone method? Because remember, the call to a phone is also leveraging your telecoms provider. I've seen a scenario where a particular senior director was not getting, it was back in Nigeria, was not getting token. And because it's a senior executive, shouting, everybody running helter-skelter, it's not working. And then when they came to, of course, the IT support has been struggling with the thing. And then because I was a back-end identity assessment, they reached out to me. From experience, the first thing I asked is what number is the person using? What network? Oh, the person is on Airtel, right? And then we are on MTN. So the support guy was on MTN, kept trying, it was working, but this executive director was on Airtel. So all did we do? We just said, ask the director, does he have another phone number? Oh, most times they do. We took the phone number from the back end, I can go and change the number, change it, and he got the token, and we passed that phase. Right. So in those kind of instances, it's best is because we had only one authentication method provided for the user. Because if call to phone was not working, right? No, we had two, but because it was the phone network provider that was having. So whether call to phone or whether text to phone, none of them was working. I remember. So in those kind of instances, there was no mobile app verification. The only two methods used was call to phone and text to phone. And in this instance, it was the telecom provider that was having issues. So none of them was going to go through. And so at that point, that was how we did it. So you see those kind of instances as an identity person, it didn't take me split seconds to solve because I had already had experience as to if somebody comes and says they're not getting token, because I know we're leveraging on the telecoms, I need to ask what network are you at, and because it was in the instance of Nigeria where the telecom providers most times are not reliable. But those are the kind of ways that you troubleshoot. So it's always good to have more than one authentication method, just so that peradventure anything is having issue, the user has the option to select the other method. Frank, I'm sure you remember when you say you can't remember your password and then you click it to now send you text, right? So that's authentication method. That's having multiple authentication method, exactly, so that at least you pass that stage and then you can go to the next stage. All right, so you have your lab where you're going to see how to enable, the Azure AD multi-factor authentication. Please do this. Like I said, we try not to do labs here so that we can cover as much. And then at the end of the class, if we still have time, then we can see what to do together. So the Azure authentication methods that we have when you are applying MFA is the Authenticator app. You also have the Windows Hello for Business now, which is the PIN method. So there are times once you enforce the Windows Hello method to give you a PIN and you don't necessarily have to use your passwords. We have the FIDO2 security key. These ones are physical devices. The auth hardware token is also in preview method. And then you have the auth software, you have SMS, you have voice. And then you have security questions. Also, you have email address, which is now available for self-service password reset. And you have app password methods for legacy apps, right, that don't support MFA. So legacy apps that don't support MFA, Microsoft has introduced what they call the app password methods. Like I said, for those organizations that want to see their on-prem applications on their device, like as if that application was published on the internet, meanwhile it wasn't. When we want to enforce MFA, because those legacy applications will not allow us to do the integration of MFA, we have what we call app password method during the setup. So registering an authentication method is pretty straightforward. You would see the prompts that will ask you, add. For those of you that haven't set up, when you were logging into your lab, you see to ask you. So the moment you click, you want to add, security verification method. It will ask you whether you want a code or a call me, and then you select your phone, you put your phone number, and that's it. So we also use there's the authentication monitoring part that you will see on the Azure AD that allows you to gain usage and insight, right? Where you can monitor authentication methods. And this allows you to see things like risky sign-ins, failed sign-ins. You can also see if a registration was successful or failed, because the reason for this alert is, imagine somebody is trying your password multiple times, right? And the person is trying an authentication method that is not yours and is failing. You can decide in an organization to say, if somebody has had 5 failed MFA attempts, block the account or disable the account. Depending on the organization, they've identified that once somebody compromised any of our users, we are gone. So those users have been categorized, or maybe certain kind of users have been categorized that if these users account for any reason is compromised, the organization is gone. So you see these users, we can't even afford to allow them have any mistake. Once 3 triggers has been attempted, disable the account or block the account or, something so that the person is forced to call service desk or raise a incident, request, and then that account will be removed, and then maybe password reset or so, or it will force password reset. So depending on an organization's use case, but the monitoring, usage, and inside view allows us to be able to see what's happening in our environment, and we can be able to now decide, okay, these are how people are using MFA in the environment. These are things we can do to improve on that usage. Another security function that is good in the Azure identity space, Active Directory space, is self-service password. Think about the number of service desk calls you will get if you have to tell people to always call. I've worked in IT at the time where everybody calls to reset their password, right? But now there are more secure ways where you can allow people to reset their password and still enforce, a certain level of security on it, right? So when we say the Azure self-service password reset, the acronym that we use is SSPR. Okay, what does it mean? It means that users can reset their own password. It means that they don't need IT. It means that it helps to reduce the loss of user productivity time, because imagine people always calling service desks, those service desks people cannot expand their career because they spend how many efforts trying to reset those passwords. So it reduces help desk efforts. And then it helps you now enforce, because you want to do self-service password, right? It now helps you enforce MFA, because you're not going to allow people to be able to reset their password if they don't have a second factor authentication, which will help you to verify them explicitly, right? So while we are improving on operations, we're also improving on security. So for me, it's a win-win. SSPR allows you to have a win-win situation, right? To be able to achieve this. Any questions so far?
No, none from me.
So for you to how do you enable SSP? Straightforward. From that, your Azure Active Directory, you would go to properties, and we have a lab that allows you to do this, and then you just select enabled. The good thing with SSP is, if you remember, we said that in identity and access management, while we're doing verify explicitly, we also do what's that one? Least privilege. So it means that there are certain kind of user accounts, maybe service accounts. We know what service accounts are. Service accounts most times are not accounts owned by a user. So for instance, Franca is trying to create a Power BI dashboard. And for her to be able to connect to a data source, they've given her an account that she embeds in maybe data source string, an ODBC string, that she uses that password so that once she authenticates, she can go into the data source and then pull the tables that she wants, right? That account is an identity. That account, an organization can decide that, you see, those kind of accounts, we'll put them in a group. And so for those accounts, we will not allow SSPR, because those accounts, the moment somebody can change it, it means that anybody can have it, because those accounts are not owned by user. So it's not every day somebody is trying to use them to log in for us to even to know if the account is compromised. So when you want to enable SSPR, you can actually select the group that you want to enforce SSPR on, instead of enforcing it to all your domain. Because the moment you force it to all your users or all your domain, what that means is that any account that requires username and password, anybody can take it and change. As much, even if you have put conditional access policy that will probably enforce them to put MFA. But remember, some of these service accounts don't require MFA because of their function. So their use case does not require the account to have MFA. But now you have not excluded them from SSPR, and SSPR will enforce MFA. So you see that you must always understand your use case when you are designing and planning, your identity and access management security. Okay, just a rough view of the kind of licensing, that you need. So Azure AD is free. Once you create a Microsoft 365 account, Azure AD is free. But if you buy the Microsoft 365 Business Standard, Azure AD is also free. And you can actually have only your cloud users can do the SSPR. If you buy the Azure Business Premium, Azure AD is free. Your cloud and your on-prem users can change. If you buy the Azure AD Premium, so for instance, you buy the Microsoft 365 Business and still go and buy the Azure AD P1 or P2 licenses, you can still do the integration. There's also the side of the E5, the E3 kind of licenses that larger businesses use. Okay, these are for small businesses. So what this is trying to show is that if you're a business of 10 users, 20 users, 30 users, 100 users, don't say, my demo was showing me E5. That means I have to go and sell E5 to them. No, they can use this small business licensing models and still be able to benefit from these functionalities. Okay, you try your lab again. Now remember, we've said that identity is not only to user accounts, right? Identity is also to devices. Devices are also identities, right? So how do we also enforce MFA for devices? Again, using the conditional access policy, right? So we have policy for Windows Intune or Windows Intune enrollment, policy with Intune device settings. So you can say, okay, if this device is not yet enrolled on Intune, enforce MFA or enforce the device to go and enroll in Intune first, right? And then the device will now be able to, have MFA. MFA is supported for both iOS, iPad, Mac, Android, and even Windows, right? It's not limited to only Windows. So when you're using Azure Active Directory, it's not limited to only Windows. And you can enforce a device. You can use, say, all devices that are this. So for instance, I'm using my personal device to access my company email. Because my company wants to make sure, because it's my personal device, it means that I can install any app, right? The company is not mandating me to use XYZ apps on my phone. But because the company also needs to protect their platform, what they have done is the moment you are using a non-corporate device, right, it automatically would force you to have MFA. Okay. And the moment, like I said, if my device IP changes today, it will even block. I won't even be able to access company resources because I've gone to a zone that is flagged as a red zone. So MFA enforcement is not only on user accounts. You can enforce MFA on devices too, in BYD scenarios, in corporate owned devices scenarios. So we want to protect our Azure AD from device attacks. We do device registration. We say non-compliant devices that are accessing applications. We monitor them. We do things like BitLocker key retrieval. We ensure device administrator rules, sign-ins to virtual machines. So what this is just saying is that the Azure AD, because of the amount of data it's getting, we can actually protect the Azure AD from device attacks once we monitor these devices, for all of this. And you can use tools like the Azure Monitor, Microsoft Sentinel, look at logs like the Azure AD logs, sign-in logs, the Microsoft 365 logs. This is now where you want to go into full SOC security mode, where you're monitoring logs and creating enhancement policies.
Sorry, please, could you go back to the last slide?
Okay.
Just, yeah.
This one.
Just looking to yes. Okay. Yeah, looking at the tools and the logs with device data.
So these are, trust me, that's why I said that, you're on the right path. Like as you advance in identity, you begin to, once you have understood how to take a use case, create a scenario, implement it, the next thing you want to do is to improve. And for you to be able to improve on security, you want to know how to interpret logs, right? So for instance, you want to say, why are we seeing high try of accounts from Russia? our business doesn't have anything to do with Russia or from Pakistan. And these areas are known to be where hackers, exist more. So those kind of things can now allow you to say, you know what, let's create a conditional access policy that blocks location base or that blocks access from this location. You can get visibility into your Azure AD, what is happening in your Azure AD from the Azure AD logs. You can see what is happening. You can be able to know people's login time, when they logged in, what they logged in, even in event of investigation. When I used to be in the banking industry, we were very, very important role. I was in the forensic and investigation team. Once there's a fraud, everybody knows that, Joy, it was part of what also sold me as an integrity person, because I was always involved in forensic and fraud investigations. People just knew that there were certain things I couldn't be involved in, because I'm not going to see something and because he's my friend or somebody that I know, going to maybe clean up that log. So people just knew me as that. Once there's rumor has gone that the fraud has happened, everybody begins to know. Sometimes I won't come to the office. Sometimes I'll sit in a different location, sit in CIO's office, because I'm trying to extract very sensitive information. But logs are what helps us. I've seen fraud investigations where somebody crafted the fraud very well to say he was on leave, but the moment he went into another branch, because he was on leave, he didn't go to his normal office, went to another branch. We're able to see logs that proved that this person logged in from here with this account and did what. And even when the person went ahead to claim that the account was compromised, there were other audit and identity logs that I could pull out from communication, as little as printer. The person went to print, I could pull out what was printed. And because the printers had PIN, it meant that the job, it wasn't just sending to the printer, the job came out and was picked up by using the person's PIN. And then we could now ask for CCTV footage on this location that now proved that that person was there. So when it comes to forensic and investigation, identity people are very, very important, because you need to think, how does this identity flow? But this is just speaking to that. These logs are very, very important, and they help us in improving on our identity security as you advance.
Okay, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay, could you explain the logs? When do you use those logs? I know the vault is when you are talking about keys and, when do we use the different logs? There are different logs there.
Okay, so the Azure AD audit log is for everything. The moment you put in your username and password, is going to the Azure AD audit logs. The Azure AD audit logs tells us who is logged in, what time the person logged in, which device the person logged in. The same thing with the sign-in logs, right? The AD audit log tells us who makes changes. So if you go and create an admin account, or you create a user, make the user a member of an administrator role, everything will be inside the audit log. So the Azure AD audit log tells us every form of Azure AD modification that has happened. While the signing log tells us every type of signing. This person signing in from Kafanchan, this person signing in from a mobile device, this person signing in from a mobile device that is Android, this person signing from a mobile device that is iOS. That's what the signing logs tell us. The M365 audit log tells us all the kind of activities that happens on the M365 interface. Who created what user? What changes was made on the user? This user account, what and what as an administrator did the person go? Did the person do an e-discovery of people's mailboxes? Did the person try to modify sender permission on people's mailboxes, on people's groups? The M365 audit log tells you that. The Azure Key Vault, like you mentioned, is specific to key users. So lots of key and key accounts, store keys and storage accounts that you create on Azure, the Azure Key Vault, because once you create these accounts, you're going to log them, vault them in the Key Vault. So the Azure Key Vault helps you know, okay, this account, this vault is owned by Joy and Franca, but Franca is the one that came on Saturday to access this account. So like those service accounts I said that can be given to you as a data analyst to use and create your strings for your maybe your ODBC connections, because it's shared. So me and you are on the same project. I know the password, you know the password. So what we do is probably vault it. So anytime anybody needs to, you go to the vault and take the password. So the vault probably either changes the password from time to time. So we can know that, okay, Franca was the one who collected the password on Friday by 12 o'clock. and Joy collected the password on Saturday by 1. And so if the fraud happened on Saturday between 2 to 3, there's every tendency that is more around what Joy did than more around what Franca did. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. We also have the, Azure AD MFA activity reports, right? The reports shows you, was the sign-in challenge with MFA? How did the user complete the MFA? Which authentication method did the user use? Why was the user unable to complete? These are good for troubleshooting. So if somebody says, I'm not able to get my MFA, the MFA audit activity report will tell you, oh, the person was prompted with MFA, but the person did not click within the time frame, so it timed out. And maybe the person is just, users can be funny. It's not working. Meanwhile, the person is chatting and trying to log in. So for every time she turns back to her screen, the thing has timed out. She has to start again. By the time she does it 2 times, she's frustrated. When they call service and service that escalates to you, from here you will know what the issue is, and then you'll be able to say, please, the MFA prompt is done within 5 minutes or 10 minutes. So can you please just focus and do it? Because probably the person is being distracted and coming back and claiming it's not working. So the user signing reports too, like I mentioned, it tells you a list of policies. So from the user signing report, you can even see the policy that the user was matching, right? And the different authentication method sequence, all right? And whether or not the authentication attempt was successful, and details about why the authentication failed. All of this you will see in the user signing report. So, so the Azure Active Directory is not just telling you can do, it helps you with detailed reports that help you with troubleshooting, and then you can trace where your problem is. And you will see this user sign report on that same Azure Active Directory where you have users. If you scroll down to activity, you see sign-in reports and audit reports. Okay, we manage user authentication. So we've said it countless of times. The normal historical way users authenticate is username and password, right? But with modern day authentication and security, right? You don't just want to leave username and password. So what do? We have now supplemented or replaced authentication with more secure methods like MFA and Microsoft Authentication, FIDO keys, right? To do what? To help us provide, better authentication. So ideally, the SMS and voice was an authentication method that existed. It's still there. Microsoft didn't take it away. But what Microsoft is saying is that it's good, but it's not the best. Because I just give an example. Even without a compromise, we all know now how they do mobile number hijacking. So somebody can actually hijack your mobile number and be receiving your MFA tokens, right, via SMS. So as much as it's a good way to ensure multi-factor authentication, but it's not the best security method. So another way is to have tokens, right? People that have software tokens or hardware tokens, and then you have MFA. But what we have seen in recent time that the best methods that we have up until today is either we use the Microsoft Authenticator or we use the Windows Hello. The Windows Hello is encrypted keys that are local to hashed on your devices, right? And so once you use that, it's able to also use your face. So for me, if I want to log into my system, if it doesn't see my face on my camera, it doesn't allow me log into my system. It needs to see my face, so I don't necessarily have to. It's when it has tried, it's not recognizing my face. I don't know, maybe the days I'm not smiling. Maybe when I set it up, I was smiling. I can't remember. But the days I'm putting my face. This is still the same. It cannot. I don't know. I can't find you. Joe. So it will now prompt me to use my PIN or to use my password because it keeps saying it can't recognize me. This just speaks to what we've been saying about authentication, method strengths, right? Password with two-factor authentication is inconvenient, but it has high security, right? Password-led authentication is convenient and has high security because you don't have to worry about the password. Password-led is the whole Windows hello. Passwords are convenient, but they are low security. So if you're doing an identity and access management assessment for an organization, these kind of things are one way you can use to do the assessment. So if you have this quadrant, you can take whatever method that they have and put. So if they have password alone, you put it here. This shows them that, oh, you are prioritizing convenience over security. And if they have password and two-factor authentication, you tell them that yes, it's inconvenient, but your security is high. So what's the risk assessment metrics of your organization? If you know security is more important for you guys, then they will have an understanding as to, okay, this is what we are doing, this is the culture. So if you've done an assessment, this is how you can interpret. So if you've done an assessment of a CCTV implementation, identity implementation, if after setting it up, all you did was create passwords that was shared with all the security people so that they can view cameras, what you have done is that you created convenience with low security on that CCTV infrastructure, identity, and access management platform. We'll skip this because we need to go. I'll just explain it briefly, but because we can't practice it. FITSO is a security key that have unphishable specification. Is based on password-led authentication method, and it comes in any form factor called the fast identity one specification for password-led authentication. Is a new passwordless authentication method that okay, not relatively new, but it's one of the methods that Microsoft is pushing really now because its technology is leveraging on passwordless, so people don't have to really remember their passwords. I think from the first setup, the security keys that are generated is what is used to complete your authentication method. We don't have scenarios where we can implement it, so but it allows you to still do your self-service setup. You can enforce authentication. That's if set to yes, the FITSO key has to be published and verified with the FIDO Alliance. And then you can also enforce key methods. So that way people don't have to remember. So we have things like the FBI and all those kind of places. They use this kind of things. So for some of their vaults or some access to certain records, they just want it to be a key method. And so only people that need access will be profiled on that method. So for Microsoft authentication, all right, it's usually a code. It's an app, sorry, that you download on your mobile device. It provides you with a PIN or to verify a number. It also generates an oath verification code. And the oath verification code is a one-time code that you enter, and then you can enforce this with policy and governance. Like I've said before, the authentication app is available on any type of mobile device, Android, iOS, right? And users would receive the notification through the mobile app for them to approve, right? And then once they approve, they can, provide the matching numbers. So there are different types. You can use authentication method of matching numbers where there's a number on the prompt of the screen and then there's a number on the authenticator app. So in that instance where we are saying something that you have, if somebody has compromised your password and then asks for authentication and the person puts, because you are the one with your device, the moment you are seeing a prompt, there was a time I was trying to log into a client's platform, and every time the MFA prompted me, my location that it was showing on my authenticator app was not the location where I was. But I was the one trying to sign into my account. What that just triggered, because when you start doing security, you become paranoid. For me at that point, I just felt, hope somebody had not compromised my system and then maybe was rerouting my system IP. So at that point, I had to just uninstall my app and then get it to force me to re-onboard, so that at the point where it's forcing me to re-onboard, I can be able to see if it can detect my real location, because I wasn't in that location. It was showing me a totally different location. So in my head, the only thing that made logical sense, I didn't further troubleshoot, because when I reloaded and forced it to re-onboard me, it now took my real location. But in my head, I was like, somebody compromised my system and was masking and was rerouting my IP, because that wasn't just my IP, that wasn't my location. So what matching number helps you do is it will pop up on your own device and tell you where that request is being made from. So at that point, if you're not the one, you can boldly say, I'm not in China. I'm not, or I'm not even trying to log into any device. Why is this thing popping me up? And then you can deny it and say it's not you, and then request for, a password reset. You can look at your multi-factor auth tokens on your Azure Active Directory also, when you also come to where you have the, instead of users, you will see the security. Once you click on security, you will see where you have your auth tokens. Azure AD automatically generates these auth tokens, so there's nothing for you to do. These tokens are generated programmably, right? So they don't come with a secret key or seed program. These they can be set up using secret keys. It's done, based on a program, and you can actually deactivate, someone's MFA token from here once you log into the backend auth token view on your Azure Active Directory. Windows Hello, is trying to replace passwords with strong two-factor authentication on PCs and mobile devices. It's a type of authentication that is tying user credentials to device, and then you either use a biometric or a PIN. So me, my biometric is my face, and then my PIN is my fallback. It lets you to authenticate again into the Azure Active Directory. One of the things Windows Hello does for you is you don't have to worry about passwords, right? With Windows Hello, during the setup, it will ask you to either put your fingerprint or put your face during the setup. And the moment you put your fingerprint or your face, and I think I did fingerprint and face, or no, I did face. So a biometric, either your face or your fingerprint, then you don't have to remember your password. And in this instance, because you're not remembering your password, you don't have to worry about reusing password, because that's another challenge with people, because people don't want to be remembering different passwords. You see somebody use the password that they're using for their personal email, for their corporate email, and that's the same password for all their social media platform. Now, because they don't have a proper social media hygiene, their social media accounts get hacked, and then from there, their corporate accounts also, get hacked, and then but with password-led, the Windows Hello password-led method, you don't have to know any username or password or worry about, exposing. Some technical terminologies or technical key points to notice that the credentials for Windows Hello are encrypted. So they are certificate or asymmetric key type of methods, and they are tied to the device. So if you're setting up Windows Hello on your device A, you have to set up Windows Hello on your device B, right? It doesn't move it across. And then it helps you to identify, you can integrate it with Azure Active Directory. Keys are also generated using TEMP 1.2. These are encryption methods, right? So your private key is always encrypted on your device, and it never leaves your device. So that way, your account can be compromised to an extent. Like I said, there's nothing that cannot be compromised in the world where today, as you are thinking security, that's how the bad guys are also thinking of how to compromise us. But then it's based off of, very high top encryption methods. And the concept is that that key is tied to that device, so it's not leaving there. Unlike your password that you use here, then you go to your friend's house, you forgot your laptop or your battery is dead, and you beg your friend, please let me just use your laptop and quickly do my assignment. Once you did it, you forgot to take out your password, your account is still there, and that your friend's account laptop gets compromised, then they harvest all your credentials. But in the case of a Windows Hello, it's per device. It doesn't, the encryption key is locked on that device. Okay, so accounts can be disabled and user sessions can be revoked. You would have cases where you need to disable account. Like I said, you can have a trigger that says, oh, if an account has tried to log in 3 or 5 times, disable this account as the response, as the incident response to possible account compromise. Because remember, one of the zero trust methodology for identity is the assume breach. So we could say if an account has done password reset or try to do this 5 times, means someone is trying to compromise the account. Oh yeah, disable or revoke user sessions, right? Or reset password, right? So these are possible occasions where you can disable an account or revoke an existing user sessions. It all depends where. Also, in instances where people have left organizations. So if somebody has left an organization, you can disable the account, and just not just disabling the account, you can revoke all the access for the users, from that account, from that device. Most times you find organizations when they are doing their leavers process, once people have left the organization, they don't revoke user sessions. So what happens is that those people's devices still have their corporate emails there. And those copy of emails that have already been downloaded on that device stays there. So you can revoke accounts, right? It helps you to mitigate the risks of access to company data. This is just talking about PowerShell scripts that you can use to do this. It's good. You can copy them out, and they're PowerShell scripts. They're all over the internet. For me, when I try and use PowerShell scripts, I have my notepad where I save them just so that if there's a need for them again, I don't have to go and start worrying, Googling. I just know that, okay, this is PowerShell script that can help me disable and enable. I don't have to go and look for Google again to start getting. Okay, now we have in the Azure AD, we've talked about authentication, right? We've talked about how to enhance the user identity, whether it is user account, whether it's application identity, whether it's device identity, we've looked at the importance of MFA, and even when we introduce additional security benefits like SSPR, the importance of how you can use conditional access to enforce, those MFA policies. Also want to look at the Azure AD password protection, right? The Azure AD password protection is looking at that, your domain controllers, right? They don't need to talk to the internet directly. Password protection also helps you enforce, passwords policies, right? Have you ever been curious to understand why when you try to create accounts, maybe you're creating an account and you create an account and use password 123, it doesn't go, right? But there are some applications that you find on the internet when you do password 123, it goes. It's because those accounts have not done what they call, password protection enforcement. So it doesn't protect them against weak dictionary-based attacks. Meanwhile, when hackers come, what they do is the password exploitation tools have this dictionary base that they have, that they flood your account to. So they tell the if you do an ethical hacking course, the password flooding tool will just take. So if it says joy.emedom@microsoft.com, if he puts it on the dictionary to say it should run through, to give any matching password. So if my password matches any of those dictionary words, then that's it. So most times when your password is complex, because they don't exist on those dictionary those in hacker dictionary database, right? Your passwords will not match. So how are organizations supposed to help you enforce these passwords so that you create passwords that are not based on dictionary words, right? It's using things like the Azure AD password protection. And the password protection also is what helps you when you put your password. You are seeing your password in clear text, right? But when your password is being sent to the domain controller to authenticate, it's not coming in clear text. I remember an executive director that we had, then she would always think that we in IT, we could see their passwords. So she was like, IT people, are you sure they're not seeing our password? And we will tell her that when it came to password, the method, another person can never know your password because the passwords are in password hash and they're encrypted, except where, in the days of Windows 7, we could exploit password hash, or if there's a vulnerability on your domain controller, the password hash can now be exploited. And then there are tools that help you read password hash and then now convert those hash to real password. This is talking about an on-prem environment, so we would skip this because we don't have on-prem environment. But let me see if I can. So ideally, in an on-prem environment, for you to be able to enforce the Azure AD password protection in an on-prem environment, what you would do is to also, on those your domain controllers in your on-prem, install what we call the Azure AD password protection agent. So you install it on domain controllers, right? And once you install it on domain controllers, it will help you to enforce those read-write password policy in your SysVault. So in your on-prem domain controller, the database for the Microsoft on-prem Active Directory are called SysVols. And so this SysVols, the Azure AD password protection agent, would always go there to now enforce, the password policy, so that once a user changes their password, the password policies would, say, oh, this password is weak, this password is a dictionary-based password, deny or Frank, I can remember when you tried creating password and kept saying your complexity was you kept trying and then you enforced you must use 13, minimum of 13 characters, the complexity must be like this. All of those things that annoy users. Yeah. It is the password protection configuration that enforces you to create passwords in line with that, just so that it can ensure that your password is protected.
Okay, sorry, I have a question. So if you try several times and it kicks you out, so what do you do? Like if I try several times and it kicks me out, what do I do?
When you say try several times, is it when creating the password or when using the password?
Yeah, when trying to okay, the MFA, like when I try several times to get in, yeah, with the password, then the MFA, yeah, when it kicks you out, because you also mentioned it that if you try several times, you'll think, okay, is it when you're referring to a company, an organization, not Microsoft? Microsoft won't kick you out permanently.
Okay. No, it depends on what your conditional access policy says. So remember, you want to verify explicitly. So you could say, right, that in your policy, if somebody tries an account 3 times, right, and it's not correct, then lock the person. Or you could not have that policy. So for you, keep trying. Now, I'm saying that as an identity security person, the consequences of not putting this kind of enforcement means that if a hacker is trying, because when hackers are trying, they're using bot systems that are trying your password multiple times in split seconds. So if you don't have anything that says that if something tries it more than X number of times, block, what it means that bot can do 1,000 password in 1 minute. Right, so you find out that your password has been tried to be compromised in 1 minute, 1,000 times, versus you saying that if someone has tried it 3 times and is wrong, block. And so that way, that alert will show up in the sign-in, and then you can see, oh, there's been a password attempt 5 times, been a password attempt 10 times, And then the SOC team can either decide if they want, depending on the strength of the organization, do we call the user? In organizations that are big, because they don't want to start calling, what they do is when they say block after 10 failed attempts, they just say prompt for password reset, or they say disable the account. So the user now forces to call service desk to say, trying to log in and I can't log in. This is what happened. And then they say, oh, your account was, you notice that your account, had multiple failed attempts. Where are you? They ask certain security questions before they re-enable back the account. So it all depends on what scenario are you implementing that situation for.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So smart lockouts, that's what I'm talking about. Smart lock is the intelligent ability to tell the system to lock out an account. You don't have to wait till the account is compromised and now say, oh, identity, block Joy's account. From what we are seeing in SOC, it's like our account has been, you can intelligently smart lock accounts, right? Like I said, you can say if an account has 10 failed attempts in 1 minute, because as a human being, how many can you try your accounts in 10 minutes, in 10 failed attempts in 1 minute? It means that there's a bot trying to do something. It's not you. So the system can say, oh, 10 failed attempts or 50. Let us say we have wizard staffs that can try it. You can now say, okay, let's do 15. But there are certain things that from human psychology, a human being cannot try to use their account 15 times and not remember their password. Then at that point, they don't know the password. Then that means they're not the owners of the account, or that means they've forgotten the password. Because genuinely ask yourself, are you going to be patient to try your account 10 times and not remember your password? Most times, ideally, if you are the real owner and you've tried it 2 times and you can't, the next thing you're clicking is forgot password because you're tired. So if something is really trying your account more than once and tried it 10 times, there's every 99% chance that that's not you. So you want to provide a protection that comes with smart lock that says once you see this thing, block it. And if the failed login attempts is frequent, or we notice it every weekend, block this account. So these are default configurations that exist that provide smart lockout, but you can customize it based on what you have observed from the logs in your environment. Again, there's an exercise to show us smart lockout. Kerberos authentication is one of the type of authentication methods that exist for on-prem applications. So remember when we said that if you have an on-prem application that you want to extend over the internet, the Kerberos authentication is what allows this. So you set up your Azure application proxy that speaks to your on-prem, that speaks to your app proxy connector that is sitting on-prem. So your DMZ, for those of you who don't know network, DMZ is what connects the internet to your own environment. So you put your application proxy connector behind your internet. This is your internal application sitting here. And then this is your AD Connect here. And then the user can, through Kerberos authentication, connect to the connector. The connector would go to the AD Connect and verify, okay, Joy is the real user. It goes back and then goes back to the Azure Active Directory and then says Joy is a real user, and that says, okay, allow her access to the company app. And then Joy is able to see the company app from outside the company network. So this application here is not published on the internet, but because of the application proxy, you are able to see this application over the internet. Another type of authentication method that we have is what we call the certificate-based authentication. Okay. So we have certificates. Certificates are trying to look for. I like to use very simple terminology just so that we don't feel overwhelmed. There are ways to encrypt the type of technology that is used to encrypt traffic or communication, right? And because they have these high encryption methods, you can decide to use certificates instead of username and passwords to authenticate. Most times you will see this in an application scenario. So when you go to a website, you see your www, your HTTPS, blah, blah, blah. You now see the padlock sign that is there, right? For that communication that you are doing. So imagine your internet banking. What gives you the confidence to put your username and password on a browser and then be sure that that traffic that is going to now come back and open your account for you, it's not compromised? It's because first level authentication, there's a certificate that has been integrated on that URL that encrypts your traffic to the back end, server. So most times, when a user will sign into a web browser-based application or platform or your mobile platform, you will see that certificate, for that account, and it is validating either the subject name or the principal name, saying, okay, ibank.gtbbank.com is legitimate, and then it encrypts that communication channel. So certificate-based is used most times in application, but we also have scenarios where we do device-based authentication these days, where an organization will push a certificate to your device to just make sure that anytime you're logging in, if a device that you're logging in does not have the company certificate, then it will not allow you access their company environment, because it will mean that your device is not their own, and they don't want any device that is not their device. So I'm sure you will see those kind of scenarios in DSS environments, in FBI, in CIA, those kind of places. They'll never allow you to use your personal devices to access companies. So in those kind of scenarios, they'll be doing machine-based authentication, where they'll push certificates to machines, so that if for adventure you carry your friend's device and you're trying to connect, the moment it doesn't have that company certificate, it will not allow you to authenticate. So when people begin to create virtual machines in Azure, the good thing is that they can extend the Azure AD to those virtual machines also in Azure, right? So this is just allowing us to know that we can extend Azure AD credentials to VMs. So when people start to create virtual machines in Azure, they don't necessarily have to just use the default. They can use login credential, whether it is Linux, whether it is Windows. You can create, Azure AD authentication. All right. All right. So Microsoft has what it calls the security defaults, right? Security defaults provide security default settings that Microsoft manages on behalf of organizations, so that the customers are safe until the organization is ready to manage their own identity security. So because Microsoft knows that many organizations don't know, that's why I say you'll be amazed at small organizations who probably you have access to their IT, they don't know. But what Microsoft has now done is that over the years, Microsoft has, by default, once you enable Azure AD, maybe you get Office 365, it will enable what it calls the security default. And the security default is what will now require you to do multi-factor authentication for only email and phone number, right? So security default is enabled by default, just so that, okay, because we know that we still have attacks like password spray, password relay, phishing, and these attacks are becoming popular. If we keep waiting for our customers to go and enable security default by themselves, I think it was sometime last year, Microsoft now enforced that, security defaults will enable it by default. So by default, once you profile somebody on Office 365, the person will be prompted to provide an email address or a phone number where they receive their tokens as second factor authentication. But if you remember the chart where we showed you that password is good, email and SMS is better. But when you now put it with multi-factor authentication app or the Fido2 app or the password app, then you have the best security. So, but Microsoft has done this just so that you have security whether or not you even know by default, right? Once you profile users. So who should use it? Organizations that want to increase their security posture but do not know how, where to start, right? So It's a default security function that Microsoft has put. Instead of you just saying, there are lots of phishing attacks, let's just be using username and password. By default, Microsoft allows you to still do security defaults. So you are doing multi-factor authentication. It's just that you're not using the best multi-factor authentication method, right? Security default will not allow you to do conditional access policy, which now helps you enhance your security, right? If you have premium licenses, which your demo tenant has, security default is not the best, but the lab will show you how to do it. But like we said, when you are trying to help an organization grow and mature into security, you don't just want to come and give them big man, because some of them too, the cost implication. So if an organization has not invested in a license that gives them that Azure P1, P2, first of all, begin to improve on their identity and asset management. So like I said, start with the identity and asset management audit of what they do today. Use that quadrant and show them where they are and the impact of what they are doing, and tell them that this is with your present investment, we can improve on your security, and then you can now have a 1-year roadmap to maturity into here. So that's how you sell the identity security story. You don't just come and say, you don't have multi-factor authentication. If you don't have P1 license, your account will be there. No, with the free Azure AD, if you do the assessment, you see where they are now. You understand how they are signing licenses. You understand how they are signing people to groups. You understand how they are enabling people to be able to change their password, and then you build a assessment report out of that and say, okay, this current investment they have, which of the futures do they have that can allow them? Security default. You're not using security default. You're still doing just username and password. No. Prompt people to either use their voice call or SMS as their second factor authentication. And then this is the benefit of it. And then you can say in 6 months' time, you can look at, buying this XYZ license that can now allow you to do these additional things based on what we have seen, because you can still see from the sign-in logs, you'll be able to see the behavior of the staff, be able to see the behavior of the environment, and then use that to monitor and usage and data reporting, activity reports to provide, recommendation for them, what they can now do in the future and how they should mature. So security default helps you provide that security layer for them without conditional access policy. I don't know how many of you did computer science in school. If you remember then when they are teaching us those Fortran, I think Pascal and Qubits, and I think QBasic and the rest. We did
Yeah, I
the if.
did.
Yes.
Yeah.
We did the if then statement, all of that. So that's how
Conditional. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So that's the foundation for where conditional access policy came. Is based on a condition. There has to be an if, and if that if exists, then if the if does not exist, then that's what conditional access policy is. If users are logging in from anywhere
Else
outside
you
Nigeria,
block.
yes, if users are connecting anywhere outside Nigeria, so that's the if, then do what? Then prompt for MFA. Or if user is connected from a jailbroken device, then do what? Block. So once you understand the if then statement, you will know how to create conditional access policies. That easy. Once there's an if, there'll be
Okay, so there is no else here. Else block. No?
Yes, so you can do the else. So you can do if this, else do this, and then this. Yes, you can even go that granular. You can go like 2-4 steps. Yes, you can.
Okay.
So when you're doing the lab, you will see, yes, the opportunity to do else this. We've repeated this over and over again, so I run through the benefit. It increases your productivity, helps you manage your risk. You can address compliance and governance. So if you have an organization where the compliance says that devices that have not updated, that have 2 months back Windows update, should not access the organization. Devices that have 2 months back updates should not access maybe XYZ kind of application. You can create conditional access policy for it. So if those users are in finance, for instance, because we all know that hackers are targeting CFOs and all of that. So Power BI person, you have created a dashboard that shows how much the company is making, that stocks into blah, blah, blah. But you're saying we don't just want anybody to access this. So from a security perspective, if somebody is outside XYZ region, they shouldn't be able to see this dashboard. You can use conditional access policy for it. So you can explain. So during your requirement gathering, you can say, who are the people that are supposed to access this dashboard? They tell you, say, this information, if it is accessible by XYZ other people outside these people, what's the impact, the risk to your business? In some business, if certain staffs know how much a company make, it's a risk. Some staffs cannot handle knowing how much their company make. They become greedy. I've seen people who, the moment they realize that, so me that is like this, especially for we that are working well, my service to a customer is now charged per hour. So for instance, if my company is charging 1,000 naira per hour, right? Maybe they are paying me 200 naira per hour, right? But I might not know. So some people now, when they find out that, so you mean that 800 naira is what my company is making on my head? You begin to see them. So some people don't know how to manage information. It's the same thing in the banking industry. There are people, they are tellers. Right now in Nigeria, they don't do all those profiling. But back then, for you to become a teller, it had to, because when you come in the morning and your house rent was due, landlord just came to people's house yesterday and embarrassed people, and you came to work and they gave you 50 million as your cash, to do for depot. It's going to take the grace of God for you not to try and thief. So those kind of things in real world, what do you do? What's the conditional access policy that company has put? That's a manual process. You see what they do, things like they balance their book. So if you have people that worked in it, I think they call it they balance their till or something, at the end of the day. Because they found those risks existed then. People will just go in and they will take 200,000 from that money and then balance their till at the end of the week or at the end of the month. But now your till must close every day. So it's the same thing in identity. You want to manage your risk. We keep seeing that, these are our web applications, these particular applications, they are sensitive. We don't just want anybody to be able to. Let's use conditional access policy so that we can manage who can see. We can also manage costs. If we have service accounts that are also falling into our license group, we can say, oh no, if you are in this category, don't take a license because you don't need a license to function. And so that we manage, costs. We can say if a device is behind 2 months patch, do not access XYZ. So that way we stay in compliance and governance. So conditional access policy is so sweet. It helps you with lots of benefits. And then there are different components you will see during the setup. So look at your lab to look at how to set up your conditional access policy. You will see it under the security tab. So when you go to the Azure AD under security tab, you see conditional access policy, and then you can now create different policies. Like I said, the policies are if then or if else or if then else. Play around it, and there's a lab for this also. Conditional access policy can also allow you block access. I've said this severally. It can allow you block access. It can allow you grant access. And that's how it provides this benefit. Else, so you can see, you can also actually test you don't necessarily have to put block. So you can, when you create your conditional access policy, you can put it in report mode so that you can see the impact. So when you are driving adoption, most times it doesn't necessarily enforce. You can use report mode. So after creating the policy, you put it in report mode, and then the policy will start matching people. But because it's not in block, it will not be effective, right? But then it gives you insight to say that, okay, this report is actually going to work. This policy is going to work because I can see, okay, Joy is matching it, and it's people like Joy I want it to match. And I can see that it's reporting report mode, meaning that if I switch to block, then it will now action block. You can even do conditional access policy for things like persistent browser session. You can say someone's browser session should not exceed, like once it is 5 minutes, that's like I gave you an example, like somebody is trying to do MFA, but she's chatting with her friend, she leaves the thing as timeout. An organization can decide that they wanted those kind of session controls, and this person is there wasting time and then coming to tell us it's not working. The sign-in frequency, how frequently you can try to sign in. It all depends on the use case you're trying to implement, and conditional access policy helps you. So we have two key policies here: the sign-in risk-based and the user risk-based. This thing comes out a lot in the exam from the practice questions I've been looking at. So most users have a normal behavior that can be tracked. Like I said, the normal way, if your business is not doing anything in Pakistan, the normal behavior is that you see users in Nigeria, or maybe users in Ibadan, Lagos, because your business is local, right? So when this normal behavior, you begin to see an anomaly, then it is called risky. So you classify that anomaly as a risky signing. Right, and you may want to block, because remember we said we should assume breach. So at that point you may want to, as an organization, to say, when we see anomalies, we want to block, or let's ask them to reset their password, or at this instance, we have run our organization without MFA for a while. Now it's time to enforce. That's why even if an organization is not using a license that gives you conditional access policy, the good thing is that Microsoft allows you a 90 days trial. So like I said, if you do the first assessment for the organization and then find out that they don't have the right license, but you have understood you can now say, let's activate the trial method for 90 days so that we will see what the behavior of your organization, and then this insight is what we now use to do the recommendation. Microsoft even pays their partners to do those kind of assessments. So a sign-in risk is saying that there's a probability that this authentication is not by the real user. That's what sign-in is. This thing, there's a high probability it's not by the user. Why risky base is saying is that based on the way this user is signing in now, there's a risk, right? The user is signing in so let me take it again so we don't mix it up. So a sign-in risk is the normal behavior that you have seen, that somebody signs in. Now the person's, and there's an anomaly, you're now signing from London. Meanwhile, we're seeing your account signing from London in the morning, and then the evening we're seeing your account signing from China. Your account signing from London in the morning and your account signing from Nigeria. Somebody might say, it's 6 hours flight, so it's possible. But you can't sign in from London in the morning and sign in from China in the evening. That's a sign-in risk, because that location signing is not normal, right? And then for user risk is saying that this user is now at risk, because we're seeing that it's not just location, it's tied. This location sign that we're seeing from Nigeria to China is not just about the location, it's peculiar to Joy. So Joy is the risky user here. Different scenarios.
Sorry, can you take that again? The signing risk base. Okay, you're saying it's location based. Maybe somebody signing in here. Yes, example, yeah. But the user risk base.
Specific to the user.
Okay, so the person can be at one location and maybe trying to sign in several times. Yeah,
No,
could that be?
No. You could see your company web portal have high signings. So we're seeing lots of signings from China, but our business is not in China. But we're seeing lots of signings from China. So what we're seeing is a sign-in risk, because right now, if we look at our business from a location perspective, we don't have anything to do in China, but we're seeing lots of trigger of sign-ins from China. When we now drill down on those signings, we're seeing that those signings are tied to users. And those users, one of them is Joy. So your Joy is now a risky user.
Oh, okay, so the user risk basis. Okay, when you're looking at the user, a specific
When you
user
are taking
now
that risk and you cannot pin that risk to a user.
to somebody, okay, to a user, okay.
So you are
All
not
right.
now saying that there's a signing risk. You are saying that Joy is a risk. This Joy is a risk. And it might
Okay,
not
when
be
you
only,
pin it down to a user,
yes,
that's when it's okay.
yeah.
Okay.
For signing risk, it could even be a device. Like I said, it might not necessarily be an account. It could be a device that is strict. So maybe a staff has left the organization. You did not kill the user sessions, right? So that staff account, but you disabled the account, right? So that account keeps triggering signing. So you are seeing that there's a device that keeps trying to sign in from your activity log. So you have a signing risk. So you can now say, okay, this signing risk that this account keeps trying to log in and is failing. So this one now is not location based. We keep seeing failed login attempts every 3 minutes. And when we go, we are seeing that it's from a device. That's a signing risk issue. And when we trace that device is not owned by anybody. So what do? We need to delete that device, revoke sessions, delete of that device. But if we're seeing certain signing risk, and we can now do that this signing risk is tied to a user account, is the user that is at risk.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Like I said, don't always start with block, right? Don't always just say conditional access. When you're applying conditional access, then when to ask you to apply, you gotta select all users, please. Oh, don't do it. Even in your test them, even in your lab, before you need, you lock yourself out. Always apply your conditional access policies to a group, right? Don't just block don't just block don't just select block access. This will block your entire organization. Then you can also, if you do conditional access that forces for compliance too, you also have to get, because if you have devices that have not been enrolled or have not passed that, you also block them. So that's why it's always good to plan your adoption. If not, you find yourself blocking, everybody out, and then you get lots of support calls. So it's good to create groups and match your adoptions to those groups. And once you have reached, the required coverage, then you can either switch the group to all users, or you create a group specific that matches that policy and every user is there. So that block all, we don't recommend it. If not, you are going to block everybody out. So conditional access policy prompt will always tell you what the thing is. So you can see here, it says, it told you, so the person got a deny, and he told the person, says this application contains sensitive information and can only be accessed from one, devices or client applications that meet Contoso management compliance policy. You need to be signed into Microsoft Edge with the work or school account shown above. To sign in, click on your account. So this person was trying to access an application, conditional access policy denied, and he told the person what it is. So this person is trying to access company portal without Edge browser, and even if it is Edge browser, is insisting that person log into the Edge browser with their work. So this is how you can troubleshoot and fix problems in conditional access policy. So the policy will always tell you, what the issue is. You can also use conditional access policy to do things like app control. So if you don't want somebody to copy and paste and print from the application, you can use conditional access policy. You can also use conditional access policy to prevent file uploads. It's a very, very powerful tool that Microsoft. So if people are interacting with certain company applications and you don't want them to move certain files off the organizations, you can use conditional access policy. You can use it to also enforce Azure Information Protection Label. So if people have not classified their documents and then they want to send that document, conditional access policy will see that, okay, this document does not have any classification, and then it will be forcing you can't send. So sometimes you're trying to send an email and it's not outside the organization and it's not going, and it will be prompting you that you need to, enforce a label on that document before it will go. So we can integrate conditional access policy with the Microsoft Defender for Clouds. Okay, so scenarios where this helps is when people are opening their, so if you're opening your Gmail or your company browser, this is how your company can also enforce that you don't move in corporate files into your Gmail by enforcing conditional access policies to cloud apps. So again, conditional access policy helped us to enforce multi-factor authentication. So back in the days, once somebody has logged in username and password, that's it. The person doesn't need to, if you say remember credential, the person doesn't need to sign in again. It won't. But with conditional access policy now, once somebody is signing in, it will check, and if the person doesn't have that that policy that you want, so for in this instance, MFA, conditional access policy can kick in, and then that person will not be able to continue with that session because conditional access policy has kicked in. So you can also in the lab see how we do session authentication control. Continuous access evaluation is also around tokens. I'll skip this again because we're not looking at tokens in this class, just to streamline what we do. But it helps with token based. You can use things like location change, password change when you want to do continuous access token evaluation. This is just explaining that conditional access policies can be used in different scenarios. And then we have existing templates. So sometimes you don't necessarily have to go and create from scratch, right? You can select a template and then you can now modify it. So there are over 14 policy templates that exist that you can use without having to start all over. Okay, I'm going to stop here. We've hit our 2 hours. Any questions so far? Let's see.
Okay. None from me apart from the. Okay, maybe if it's okay to call you within the week to assess with the. Okay, that'd be nice. Sure. Thank you very much. Yeah.
So identity protection is day 5. So we'll be looking at this in day 5. Please do your labs. If there's anybody that wants me to help them troubleshoot after now, once we stop the recording. Once again, thank you very much for staying in the class today. If you're watching us from YouTube, like we said, this is Techstylers, and Techstylers is bringing you the identity security in the cohort 4 learning part. Please try as much as possible to watch from our day 1 up to day 4 and try to do your labs. If you want to be a member of this community, please reach out to us on any of our social media platforms, and the administrators will show you how to become a member of this community, which is, by the way, free membership. But once you're able to join our Discord channel, you'll be able to have access to direct information. To all my consistent members in the identity security, thank you for always showing up. It's always a pleasure to have you. And don't forget to do your labs, because at the end of this training, we're going to start doing, projects that will show what we have learned from the lab. At this point, have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, Ma.
Thanks. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Ma.
Yeah.